Okay, all right, so we can start. All right, so I'm here today with Abdul, and I'm his PhD supervisor, and we're working, what we're presenting today is related to his PhD thesis, and this is looking at the impact of ideological shifts on developing language identity in Afghanistan. It goes over recent events in Afghanistan, and looking at, how this is impacting people who have chosen to invest in the English language. So Abdul, when you're ready, you can take us through the slide.
Thank you, sir. Can you see the slide changing? Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to thank my advisor for his support and encouragement and expert guidance in terms of conducting this research, which is part of my PhD, as he said earlier. When we look at the context of Afghanistan, we can see Afghanistan is a very multilingual society. There are up to 48 languages spoken across the country. English is regarded as a foreign language in the Afghanistan context. Well, history of English goes back to the beginning of 20th century, but it gradually increased after the withdrawal of the USSR, or former Soviet Union, in 1989. Particularly, it increased dramatically after the fall of the Taliban regime in 2001, when the foreign American troops, along with international organization, arrived in Afghanistan. So currently, English is taught at the school from grade 4 to 12, and also it is taught at the universities for 1 to 2 years. It is considered to be very important in Afghanistan economy. It is required for the job employment across the country in different organizations, even within the government. However, as the professor mentioned, the recent political shifts or developments in Afghanistan, which the same group that was in power 20 years ago came back into power, might have seemed to be threatening the rule and status of English in Afghanistan. So there are two research questions here, which we are interested to investigate, considering the political context of Afghanistan, also the presence of US troops in the last 20 years. The first one is why Afghan youth learned and invested in English, and to what extent the recent political development may have influenced their perception of investment in English language learning. In order to answer these two questions, we have used the two models. The first one is the Darwin and Norton model of investment, which has 3 elements. And in this model, investment is somewhat similar to the motivation, but investment is a social oriented version of motivation. It refers to the role of social interaction in learning a foreign or second language. And we can see that this model has other constructs such as ideologies, capital, and identity. Ideology is defined as the dominant modes of thinking responsible for inclusion or exclusion of ideas and individual, and it actually paves the way for the common practice of the people in the country. And capital is kind of form of power, which can be in different forms. This power can come in different forms of economic, social, cultural, and all of them are determined and are also recognized by the ideologies. Moreover, there is another new dimension to this model, which is identity. It is considered to be a side of a struggle between habitus, desire, ideologies, and imagination. So here, identity is not static. It is much more dynamic, fluid, and it is changing across time and space. And it is also influenced by the ideology. Afghan learners in general, they try to take different forms of ideology in different times and spaces, whether offline or online. And similarly, they also position themselves in different span of time, whether now or in the future, to align themselves with certain groups of like imagined communities. So basically, this model tried to answer the questions: how do language learners negotiate their identities and capital in today's globalized, technologically advanced, and also dynamic world, both in offline and online spaces? And how does the power interact within these element or landscape, social landscape, and how does it impact their investment in learning language? So generally, investing in English and also the associated form of capital transform the identity of learners as they acquire new capital. So this is the model. As we can see, that the investment lies at the intersection of these three constructs of identity, capital, and ideology. And it shows us how discrete language events are the indicator of communicative practices, and how learners both position themselves and also are positioned not only within the context of classroom or workplace or beyond that, at local, national, and global networks level. So the second theoretical framework used in this study is the linguistic entrepreneurship, which aligns the which considered the learning of a language as a moral imperative in order to exploit from the linguistic resources for improving one's worth or the value in the society or in the world. It is a conceptual lens through which neoliberal implication for language learning can be investigated. In this model, language learners are considered to be the as entrepreneurs who only invest in learning the language in order to gain profit. So there are different affiliation. They think it is their responsibility to learn the language in order to be better for their own betterment, and also they align these attributes with some other conceptions of neoliberalism, such as being self-reliant, being individualist, being entrepreneur. So this is how they want to exploit this language, considering the ideology. So now, in terms of methodology, as my advisor, Professor Michael Rabbidge, mentioned, he and I conducted this study. I'm from Afghanistan, and 20 people were involved in this study. Basically, one of the reasons why I choose this topic is because I was curious to know how Afghan EFL learners are experiencing learning English and how they are reacting to the unfolding situation in the country. So these participants are coming from different backgrounds. For the data collection, we use narrative inquiry and also interviews. For the first research question, we can see that with us, the participant in their interviews, they associated the rise or increase in learning English with the 2001. For example, when the foreign troops arrived in Afghanistan, and there was a field was being created showing the establishment of English as a form of capital. And then if you look at the example given by the Pardis, who was the 7th grade at that time, and he knew that it is very important to study English. That's how he finally wanted to study this at university level, which shows the cultural capital of learning English. In terms of the economic capital, which refers to the employment, we see that a 20-year-old urban dwelling Tajik girl who discusses how her investment in English provided her worth to her employer, and also represented the economic capital, as well as afforded her the opportunity to operate internationally. So this suggests her investment in English created an opportunity to show the neoliberal traits of initiative, innovation, and self-reliance, which in result eventually promoted her as an effective worker and also marked her as a linguistic entrepreneur. For the social capital, which refers to the international networks, we can also see an example given by another participant. who is also living in the city. He's a female, and she not only used this opportunity of learning English while living in the city, but also she used this opportunity to employ new technology to form a kind of international friendship and develop her capital within Afghanistan and also beyond in order to build connections. So we can also see this marks her as a linguistic and entrepreneur capable of creating innovative learning possibilities to further her personal development. So we can see that investment in English in these all cases can lead to acquisition or acquiring of different forms of capital, and which is social capital, economic capital, cultural capital. We just provided one example from each of these forms of capital in the case of Afghan EFL learners. Then we can also see that this kind of ideology or investment in English is aligned with the neoliberal ideologies of language being treated as a commodity in order to gain profit from investing in learning the language. In a sense, they all have become linguistic entrepreneurs by investing their time, energy, money in order to gain some other benefits in different forms. Particularly women were found to be more having freedom while investing in English and also benefiting from the capitals or opportunities it provided for them. With regard to the second question, considering the recent political changes in Afghanistan, in which the former government collapsed and the Taliban returned to power, so we conducted this study while Americans were starting to withdraw from Afghanistan and Taliban were trying to establish themselves across the country. But so they were, of course, concerned. When asked about what they thought of their investment in English may mean for them, especially for the future, we can see the participants were concerned due to the resurgence of the Taliban, and then they perceived this as forcing a change in the current field in Afghanistan, supported the capital afforded to the English language. For example, if you look at the interview with Mujgan, we can see that she's a 29-year-old Tajik female living in a major city. She says that the rise of the Taliban would threaten her access to employment, education, also other female across the country. So they will not be able to benefit from the same opportunities, from not be able to have the same access to the same capitals, whether it is social, economic, or cultural capital that they are relatively using or having access to. They will not be able to have access to this anymore if Taliban comes back. And then we can also see that there is similar concern with other participants living in major cities. For example, if we look at the case with Sohrab, he is 34 years old. He is from the Tajik ethnic group of Afghanistan population. He is also very unhappy about the US deal with the Taliban, which took place in Doha in 2020. He is already concerned about the negative impacts of that deal and also the withdrawal of Americans from Afghanistan and the Taliban return to power. So we can also see that he is concerned because he has invested a lot in learning English by spending money, his time and energy, but he will not be able to use benefit from the capitals it provided to him, or it will provide him anymore. So this can show that with the weakening of the overall structure, the ideological structure across the country, for example, after the withdrawal of the US troops from Afghanistan, the support for the English as a form of capital in Afghanistan is also being weakened. It will no longer be relevant to the country as it was before. Then what implication this study can have, or the findings from this study can indicate? Well, as an ideological support for English changes, we can see that as in the case of Afghanistan, we can also see the willingness of the people in order to invest in learning English also changes. We can see, so this study was conducted before the fall of Afghan government. They were already concerned about the consequences of this ideological shifts across the country, which will eventually impact their willingness to invest in English, because they will not see any more like capitals or opportunities in doing so. Therefore, we can say that it does impact the ability, willingness of Afghan EFL learners to learn English, because the ideological structure and support across the country has changed. Now there is a new regime, or a new regime was coming, so they will align themselves with what this regime will portray as a kind of ideology across the country, because they are in power. People shift ideological alignment when fields shift. Similarly, yes, when the fields are shifting, people also have to align their ideology with the common or the trending shifts or ideology across the country in order to survive. So this, of course, impacts their identities as being English learners, English teachers, or graduates of English language. Then they will be concerned about their imagined communities. They will not be able to position themselves in a position that they were willing to or expecting to do so when the situation was relatively calm. The ability to maintain linguistic entrepreneurial identity option is challenged by these dynamic shifting ideological shifts across the country. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now.
Yes, so if you have a question, you can either type it in chat, or you can just speak it out loud. Yes. Oops, sorry. That's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, I messed something up for a second. Oda Shihan, did you have a question? No? Okay, then I have a question. Do any of the people you interviewed ever consider leaving Afghanistan due to the shifting realities of the possible relative decline in the relative importance of English, or do they just mostly intend to stay in Afghanistan?
Well, there were people who were, well, but at the time we were collecting the data, some of them were in different cities. Some of them were planning to leave Afghanistan because they were concerned about many things, and not only because they were working with some NGOs, but also because they will not be able to work anymore by having a degree in English language, for example. Mm-hmm. They will not be benefiting from it anymore. So they were trying to leave the country but some of them were still in Afghanistan, and they were there. They said they have to align themselves with the current ideology or the shift which is taking place, because they don't have any other choice and option.
Okay. What is the main spoken language in Afghanistan? Because I was a bit surprised to see that there are 48 languages.
Yeah, I should have mentioned at the beginning. Well, there are many languages, like local languages across Afghanistan, but the two national languages which is spoken and also are the medium of instruction are Dari, which is also called the Afghan Persian, as well as Pashto. So these two are the official languages, but in some areas where the majority of the people speaks in one of the local languages, that is also called considered to be the third official language. So this is based on the former government's constitution, but I don't know what is going to happen after the Taliban return. Many things will change, including the, as we say, the status of English in Afghanistan and the language policies.
Okay. Also, is Russian spoken in Afghanistan as well, or?
No, Russian, it's not spoken anymore, but it was part of the curriculum when the Russian, when the governments which was influenced by the Russian there before 90s.
Okay.
Before 1980s, yeah, at that time. But it was not to the extent English was, common across the country after the US invasion and foreign troops in Afghanistan.
Okay. So did people mostly learn English to interact with the foreign soldiers that came over?
Well, there are, according to a study, there are four major areas or functions that they wanted to learn English. Initially, it started with the foreign troops coming to Afghanistan, because they invaded Afghanistan and it was not expected. It happened very quickly. And then because they were paying a lot of money, and even recently, those who knew English, they could get a job at an organization which can, the salary is much more higher than the government like departments. So generally they study English in order to study abroad, in order to communicate with other like international communities, foreigners, and also for the media. It is also being used in televisions or newspapers. It is also used as a medium of instruction in some disciplines in Afghanistan higher education context.
Okay. Are there any other questions? It seems that there are no other questions, and conveniently, that is the 25-minute limit for the presentation. So everybody, I would like you to either with your mic unmuted and with your real hands applaud, or you could just use the icon, but applaud for our presenter.
Well done, Abdul. Good job.
Thank you for presenting. At this point, if you would like to go to another session, you are free to leave. Do you have any questions for me before you go?
No, can me and Abdul just stay here for a minute before it closes, or do we have to leave? Do you have to close this room?
I don't have to close it. I'm going to stop recording for you. Okay.